Every settlement that dotted the western slope of Moonridge Pass claimed ownership of the legend. But anyone old enough to remember their grandparents swore that the first telling came from the wind-scarred hamlet of Cairns Hollow. According to the Hollow elders, once each generation the sky peeled open near the vernal equinox, and a single comet, the colour of dawnlit frost, glided across the firmament. From its wake, at the exact moment twilight surrendered to night, a single droplet of condensed starlight detached. By the time it sliced through the thinning air, it had crystallized into a faceted gem so flawless and so bright that the people called it the diamond tear. Whoever caught the tear before it kissed soil or stone would feel every tangle of doubt within them unravel. Their life would snap into alignment with the truth of who they were meant to become. No scripture sanctioned the tale. No scholar had recorded an eyewitness. Yet the promise of clarity lured the anxious, the grieving, and the bewildered to the high meadows each spring. They arrived with butterfly nets, copper chalices lined with lamb's wool, or simply bare hands outstretched like supplicants facing a merciful sun. Poets claimed that it was impossible to see the tear if one sought it for vanity or power. A heart must ache with honest confusion to perceive the droplet at all. Esri of Tremont Vale came with such an ache. At 23, Esri had tried on more lives than most people test hats at a market stall. Apprentice stonemason, travelling minstrel, assistant archivist, novice ranger. Each path had glittered with potential at first, only to dull beneath the weight of expectation. She excelled enough to receive quiet praise, but never enough for the work to fill that empty chamber inside her ribcage. The place that quickened when she heard her brother speak of sculpting cedar into cathedral beams, or her cousin describe unearthing dinosaur bones from loam older than memory. They sounded as though the marrow of the world hummed in their ears. Esri wanted, more than success or comfort, to hear that hum. When gossip drifted through Tremont that the Comet's window would open in a fortnight, Esri packed a bedroll, 3 apples, a wedge of sage-aged cheese, her frayed journal, and the letter her mother had left sealed for 5 years. The letter's cracked wax bore the crest of the kingdom's Cartographers Guild. Esri's mother, Clarion, had vanished on assignment when Esri was 16. Some speculated that Clarion succumbed to bandits in the Fenrath marches. Others whispered that she defected to a rival sovereign's spy network. Neither rumour satisfied Esri. What she knew. Clarion had loved maps the way priests loved liturgy, with reverence and a sharp intuition for what they concealed beneath lines and colours. In her will, Clarion had left Esri a sealed envelope to be opened when the shadow between who you are and who you wish to be eclipses your dawn. Esri had not opened it yet, fearing that the letter would prescribe a path instead of reveal one. But if she captured the diamond tear, if its light shone through her, maybe she would finally be ready to read the words, whatever they contained. So she hiked to Cairns Hollow on foot, contouring along goat paths over shale ridges. The last leg curled up a switchback lined with heather, where bees trembled among bell-shaped blossoms. She arrived at the nearest tavern, the Broken Sextant, as dusk poured gold through warped glass. Travellers packed every bench, comparing theories about when precisely the tear might fall. Some argued for the midpoint between first and second bell of night, others for the cusp between the last skylark's call and the first owl's query. Esri found an empty stool opposite a broad-shouldered woman in worn ranger leathers. A dozen tiny braids, beaded with turquoise, framed the stranger's face. She was whittling a piece of rowan wood into a figurine of a soaring kestrel. "Your first hunt for the tear?" the woman asked without looking up. Esri nodded. "You?" "Third. I'm Lisette." She blew shavings off the bird's carved wing. "Missed my chance twice. Thought I saw the droplet on the second try, but it slipped behind a cloud and I lost its line. Happens fast." Esri studied the beak of the miniature kestrel. The woodworker's sure strokes contrasted with Esri's own thicket of uncertainty. "Why keep returning?" Lisette smiled, mouth tilted half in wistfulness, half in determination. "Because the moment I glimpsed it, even briefly, Everything made sense, like hearing one perfect chord then being flung back into silence. Once you know how that resonance feels, you spend yourself chasing it. Esri understood. They shared a plate of game hen stew. Stories drifted over the clatter. A midwife who wanted assurance she could bear a child herself. A scholar wrestling with the ethics of publishing research that might revolutionize farming or create famine, depending on who wielded it. One listener scoffed that the tear was mere myth, to which the midwife responded, "A myth powerful enough to feed hope is no small thing." At moonset, patrons drifted away to pitch tents in the meadows. Lisette invited Esri to share her campsite. As they trudged over grass glazed with frost, Esri asked, "If the tear brings clarity, did you at least learn what you were searching for?" "Yes," Lisette answered. "I'm searching for the tear." She laughed at Esri's frown. "Clarity isn't always an end. Sometimes it's understanding the shape of the journey. Understanding that we're willing to gamble sleep and sense on a speck of light because restless hearts beat louder than rational minds." They reached Lisette's tent, where a fire's low embers pulsed. Beyond the fire pit, the meadow unfurled like velvet, and above, stars crowded close, hushed as if eavesdropping. Esri lay awake long after Lisette's breaths deepened. She clutched her mother's letter against her sternum. The envelope felt lighter than memory suggested. A breeze combed through the grass, carrying the faint scent of juniper. Esri asked the empty sky, "Let the tear find me before fear does." The first comet of spring was due the next night. On the day of waiting, the meadow transformed into a carnival of anticipation. Some seekers meditated, palms upward. Others rehearsed netting motions with fishing rods or flung pebbles skyward to gauge arc and height. A youth tried to train a falcon to snatch glittering beads mid-air as practice. Esri spent the hours skimming her journal. The early pages brimmed with sketches, mountain ranges, triangulated for masonry projects, chord diagrams for ballads she never finished, catalogue numbers for archived scrolls. She acknowledged each abandoned path without self-reproach. They were tributaries leading her here. Twilight sank, rinsed in rose and indigo. Whispers fluttered. "Look there!" A silver scratch etched itself across the dome of heaven. Unlike a meteor's frantic tumble, the comet glided in stately silence, haloed with ice crystals, diffracting pale green light, the color of dawn through sea glass. Gasps rose as if a single communal lung drew breath. Esri's pulse slammed upward. She glanced at Lisette, whose eyes shimmered with fierce wonder. The legend said the tear fell at the exact moment twilight surrendered to night. But twilight is not a single instant. It is a folding of light. Seekers' shoulders coiled, waiting for something no one could time. Then the meadow hushed, not by choice, but because sound itself seemed suspended. A pinpoint detached from the comet, as if shaken loose by the collective yearning beneath. The droplet glowed diamond white, plummeting with shocking velocity toward the pasture. In the second before minds shifted from awe to action, Esri saw where the tear would land, or tried to. But distance deformed perspective. The droplet might burn through the atmosphere in front of the distant ridge, or just overhead. She ran, along with 24 others, nets waving like errant moth wings. Someone cried out as they tripped over a root. Lisette sprinted parallel to Esri, boots striking turf in urgent percussion. The tear streaked between them and the tavern roof, trailing a thread of luminance that stung Esri's eyes like wind-whipped snow. Esri leaped, hands cupped. The tear whistled past her fingertips. Lisette swung her carved rowan stave like a staff, aiming to tip the droplet's descent. But the tear veered again, descending into the stand of white pines bordering the meadow's edge. Esri plunged between trunks, branches slapping her cheeks. Phosphorescent motes shed by the tear's passage dusted the pine needles. Ahead, brilliance flickered at ground level, pulsing like a heavy-breathing star. Someone reached it first. When Esri broke from the trees, she saw a boy, 15 maybe, kneeling in a ring of light. The gem hovered inches above his upturned palms, too perfect to be real, casting fractal shadows on his stunned face. The boy trembled. His lips formed silent words, a prayer or scream. Esri and Lisette froze, as did everyone else emerging from alternate paths. One legend dictated that if the first holder relinquished the tear willingly, its clarity was still theirs to share. If taken by force, its power turned to ash for all. The boy, senses returning, closed his fingers, but the tear did not solidify. It melted through his palms and plunged into the soft loam, disappearing without trace. Cries erupted. Anger, disbelief. Had the legend lied? The boy's mother clutched him, demanding what he had seen. The boy only wept. It slipped through. I couldn't hold it. Dread knotted Esri's gut, not for the boy's failure, but because the world had briefly glowed with possibility, and now that glow guttered. Lisette laid a hand on Esri's shoulder. The comet's still there, she whispered. Maybe. Another pinpoint loosened from the comet's tail. The meadow swiveled upward like a single organism. Second chances were seldom in the stories, yet hope rekindled. The new droplet seemed smaller and burned a bluish hue. Esri stepped clear of the crowd, lifted her empty leather satchel, and breathed. This time she would not chase. She would listen. She closed her eyes, feeling pressure shifts against her skin, as though space itself folded around the tear's vector. She pivoted slowly on her heel, letting instinct override sight. A hush slid across her mind, sweeping out fear as wind sweeps chaff from grain. When she opened her eyes, her gaze locked onto the droplet, descending like the bead of a plumb line over a single point, directly above her heart. Esri didn't move. She simply lifted her hands, palms skimming the air. The tear slipped into her grasp as if it had been poured between her fingers from a cruet. Its surface was cool, but inside light churned like molten core. It weighed almost nothing less than anticipation. Gasps circled her. Someone shouted congratulations. Another laughed with relief, as though a community debt had just been forgiven. Esri saw none of them. The tear filled her field of vision while simultaneously expanding her awareness beyond the ring of onlookers, beyond the meadow, beyond the trembling tapestry of constellations. In a single heartbeat, she understood that clarity was not a beacon pointing to one destination, but a lens stripping away illusions about every destination. Memories aligned like pages in a codex. She remembered sitting on her mother's lap, over parchment maps smelling of cedar resin, Clarion guiding her finger along trade routes and whispering, "Lines don't just connect places, they connect stories." She remembered shaping stone in apprenticeship, hearing grain sing under chisel strokes. She remembered campfires on minstrel roads and the hush of a listening crowd. The tear wove these memories into a lattice, revealing that none of them were failures. Each was a language she had learned to speak, and at the center of that lattice was a compass rose, whose needles pivoted not toward north, but toward possibility. Beneath the 4 cardinal points were inscriptions in Clarion's handwriting. Listen, map, build, tell. Esri lowered her hands. The tear remained floating above her palms, its glow gentling to a steady pulse, a heartbeat echoing her own. She exhaled and said to Lisette, "It's not about choosing a single path. It's about drawing them into one map." Lisette's eyes brimmed, both in joy for her friend and a longing for her own revelation. "What does that mean?" "It means," Esri answered, voice certain for the first time since childhood, "I am to chart stories. Not just places, not just songs, not just stone, all of them. A cartographer of human journeys." She knew, too, that the tear must not linger. It was never meant to be possessed like a trinket. The legend had called it a droplet, and droplets evaporate, ascend, and return. Esri angled her palms. The tear glided upward, leaving her fingertips with a glissando hum like the pluck of crystal strings. Higher it rose, swinging into the night until it dissolved among the stars. Yet the clarity remained. embedded not in gem but in bone and breath. The crowd dispersed slowly, sobered into thoughtful quiet. Some would return next generation. Others had glimpsed enough in Esri's face to seek purpose elsewhere. At the tent, Esri retrieved her mother's letter. Moonlight slicked the parchment. She broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet, its ink the dark green of forest shadows. My dearest wanderer, if you read this, you have felt the chasm inside you and dared to peer over its edge. I cannot cross it for you, but I can offer bridges I have found sturdy. The world is a conversation between what has been and what could be. Mapmakers listen to that conversation and give it shape. But maps are not only for mountains and rivers. They can chart desire, memory, injustice, wonder. Wherever a soul travels, a map may guide. I sensed early that you would inherit both my hunger for terrain and your father's devotion to story. You may find peace only where those hungers converge. If so, consider the vocation of itinerant chronicle. Walk the borders, collect tales, stitch them into cartography, one that shows people not just where they stand, but whom they stand beside. Fate willing, we shall meet again on some remotest shore. Until then, may your compass be compassion. With abiding love, clarion tears blurred the words, but Esri was unafraid that her vision would smear. Her purpose was already luminous within. She looked up. Lisette stood nearby, eyes querying. A journey? Lisette asked. A lifetime of them, Esri replied. And I will need companions, Lisette grinned. Then allow me to addition. They clasped wrists, sealing a pact older than kingdoms, to stride into the unknown together. Dawn loomed, still hours away, but peach light crept under the horizon, as if the sky itself had been polished by the diamond tears passing, revealing contours unseen. Esri found herself humming a melody from her minstrel days, overlaying it with the cadence of her mother's letters. Notes tumbled into sequences she would later transcribe on parchment, alongside sketches of the comet's trajectory, the meadow's layout, and the branching paths of every seeker she had met. It would be her first true map, one that charted intersections of yearning. By the time the sun's rim breached the ridgeline, tents were collapsing, embers doused. Esri and Lisette shouldered packs and followed a game trail east, toward valleys uncut by roads and stories unclaimed by script. Esri no longer worried whether she walked away from a calling or toward one. Each step inscribed a line upon the living atlas she now carried within. She understood that clarity of purpose was not a fixed star, but a constellation, one whose pattern sharpened with movement, whose brilliance depended on the traveller's willingness to lift their eye. Behind them, Cairns Hollow exhaled a satisfied hush, as though the very stones nodded at another chapter begun. Above, the comet faded in daylight, promise spent yet circulating in the sinews of those who had witnessed. Esri thought of the tear, either returned to cosmic ice or dissolved into the air around her. She inhaled deeply, tasting pine and possibility. And with that breath, her map-making began.